Live from our studios, just steps from the fabulous Las Vegas Strip, it's the Business Lounge with your host, David Wright.
Hi, I'm your host, Dave Wright, and welcome to the Business Lounge, where we talk to real people about real business and real success. With me today, I have Jerrie Merritt. Jerrie is the Senior Vice President and Community Development Manager for the Bank of Nevada. She also sits as the chair on the Board of Directors for the Urban Chamber. What we're going to do today, we're going to break the show down into two parts. We'll be talking to Jerrie about her role with the Bank of Nevada first, and then we'll be talking to her about the mission and the direction that the Chamber wants to take in this upcoming year. So, Jerrie, thank you for being on the show today.
You are so welcome.
It's great to have you.
Thank you.
So, I just learned that you're not a native to Las Vegas. That we don't need to say how long you've been here. However, people always want to know, how did you come to be in Las Vegas?
Well, my husband was a young man in the military. We were stationed in Fairbanks, Alaska. And one day he walked in the door and said, "We're going to Las Vegas." And I said, "Absolutely not." From the really cold to the really hot. Well, needless to say, wives don't have much to say about where their husbands travel when they're in the military. That's how we managed to get here. He was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base.
Outstanding. Mm-hmm. I also understand that you're kind of a Renaissance woman. That there's little or nothing that it appears you won't or have not done when it comes to helping people here in the community. Talk a little bit about your background and how you developed that strategy of helping people.
Well, I'm from a small town in Alabama. It's called Utah. I always,
Utah, Alabama.
Yes, I'm always very careful how I say that, because most people think of the state when you say Utah. But the name of the city is Utah, E-U-T-A-W. And I grew up the oldest to a single mother at a very early age, and was basically raised by my grandparents. And so, therefore, after finishing high school, I was also married at a very early age. And being brought up in that part of the country, or literally out in the country, I had a love for people. So after being here in Las Vegas and arriving, and I can say this, over 32 years ago, when Las Vegas was a very small community, my heart was for the community. And that's how I managed to be involved in my community. And I also have a problem saying no when people ask.
That's both a good and a bad. There's advantages and disadvantages to that.
Ask my husband, it's a disadvantage.
It's a disadvantage. You bring up an interesting statement. You said 32 years ago, when Las Vegas was probably not known for being a very welcoming arena for minorities or minority business, how did you find your way into banking?
Well, I arrived here in Las Vegas in banking already.
Oh.
I started in banking in Fairbanks, Alaska. Getting to Alaska, the pipeline had just ended. I was young, looking forward to continuing my education because my mother made me promise that that was the only condition that I could get married under and traveling with my husband. I accepted a job as a teller at the bank, and it was very easy then because the pipeline had just was just finished, and there were very few people in the community of Fairbanks. So the few jobs that were there were available to military wives. And as soon as I started at the bank, one of the first things that they informed us was that you may attend the University there of Alaska and take finance classes, and the bank would pay for it. So that's how I got started. So it didn't take me long to advance within the bank, because I was taking all of the classes in finance. So I left Fairbanks, Alaska as a branch manager within a four-year period. So I arrived here in the city as a banker.
Okay. So I know banking is not necessarily, or wasn't necessarily, a woman's career path back then. And if you were a teller, or you worked counting money or behind the scenes.
Yes.
So when you came here to Las Vegas, did you come back or come as a branch manager, or did you have to start over in the banking industry here?
I basically had to start over in the banking industry because, first of all, I couldn't convince a bank that I was a branch manager within a 4-year period of time, that I had any experience to go from a teller to a branch manager in 4 years. So I actually started over and was accepted into, at that time, which was a management training program with the bank in order to get back to my management position.
Outstanding. How long did it take you from the time you started in the management program before you started seeing your career take off again?
About 3 years, because I accepted my first position here as a teller, and then after getting into the bank, on the entry level, when the management training program was open, then I became part of the management program. I hate to say this, but I actually had to leave the bank where I was trained in order to advance. Because when you're working for a mid-sized bank, there are so many people standing in line for the position. So I took a position as an operation supervisor at a smaller bank, and then stepped into the role of operation officer. So being an operation officer here in Las Vegas was my first actual officer position. And it wasn't until I left the operation side of banking. You got two sides. You have your operation side and you have your lending side. That I really start to see my career take off.
That's interesting because just a shameless plug here for a book. No compensation here, but Malcolm Gladwell, in his latest book, David and Goliath, really talked to what you just talked about, but the framework was in schools. A lot of times people expect to succeed in a very small environment. They're the best of the best, and sometimes they can't get ahead because there are so many people waiting in line. But if you change your venue and you demonstrate that you are truly the best of the best, a lot of times your career accelerates at that point in time. So I think I don't think it was a plan necessarily on your part, maybe providence at that point, but certainly it was the right thing to do for you. And being that you're now the senior vice president at Bank of Nevada and the community development manager speaks volumes about what you were able to achieve. I'd like to just switch, directions a little bit and talk about your role as that senior VP and community development. First, talk about the senior VP role. What does your day look like?
Well, as a senior vice president, that's actually your corporate title. Officers within the bank are actually assigned corporate titles. You can have the same corporate title, but actually have a different job, okay? And before, this is a little strange and will sound strange to many people, but the highest corporate title that I've had in my banking career was executive vice president. And I was an executive vice president only 3 years ago, before something you talked about earlier as I like to call it, the downturn in our community in general. I opened up an office or a region for the bank in North Las Vegas. I left a larger bank after 17 years to arrive to a community bank to actually become an executive vice president and actually run a region. So during the downturn, when the industry was really on the downturn, there was no business in the North Las Vegas area. And as you well know, It was the hardest hit area. So therefore, in order to stay with this institution and continue my banking career, I accepted the position that I'm in now as the community development manager. So I went from being an executive vice president, which had much more responsibility, to the position of being senior vice president.
Okay. How has that changed your day-to-day life? Because you're in community development.
Yes.
And you look at community development and banking, and the two sometimes fit, but not always. Because sometimes the needs of the community aren't met by the bank, or the people in the community don't have the resources that the bank's looking for. So talk to me a little bit how that makes your job as a community development person a little more difficult than it may be.
Well, let me give you a little history. Okay. CRA, are you familiar when I say CRA?
No.
That's Community Reinvestment Act.
Okay.
Okay. In the early 70s, Congress basically forced the banks, okay, or suggest, well, they didn't just suggest, because if you were going to be, you know, a national bank or even a state bank, there was a regulation or an act that came out that said that each bank must do certain things within their community, working with the low to moderate income individual, actually developing, doing loans. Or the other part of the act actually said that you as a bank will do X amount of loans in the community in which you have financial institutions. One of the areas that really caused this to happen was called redlining, okay? Because financial institution was actually making loans in one part of the community, but they would not make loans in the other part of the community, but they actually had locations. So this CRA Act actually said to the financial institutions, if you are going to open more banks, if you are going to grow within this community, you must comply within this guideline. So with that's happening, each bank that is regulated by one of the regulators are usually audited from anywhere from 2 to 3 years based on the size of the bank, so that the regulators can find out if the banks are actually doing this in the community. So you will find that most banks, especially your larger banks, will have either a CRA officer actually in the state in which the bank is, or they will have one in the city where the bank is.
This could be perceived both as a negative and a positive, but is there a given percentage that the institution you represent says we're going to go to the community and our goal is to have X% representation in the loans or the portfolios that we have in the community?
Well, I would not say there are goals set. It is usually comparing you to your peers. Okay, so if we have bank A, B, and C in a community and they're all about the same size bank, they're expected to do a certain amount of loans within the community. Okay, they're expected to make a certain amount of donations within the community, and they're also expected to perform so many hours of services. So I would say the banks are compared more against each other than they are setting their goals, because that's what the regulators look at. They look at the city in which your bank is and what the conditions are, and they actually set the guidelines under which you should be doing these things. But it's compared against your peers. If the other banks are doing it, then you are expected to at least be able to do it also.
As you know, looking at small businesses, and that's really the focus of the show, is to really help people understand what it takes. I'm a small business person. I come to you looking for funds. Would you fairly, in a condensed version, tell me what I need to do in order to qualify or the aid that's available to me through your institution?
Okay. If you are a small business and I'm going to go back to the downturn, that happened. You were able to walk into a bank with just your projections and say, I am a startup business. I would like to borrow this amount of money, and I project this is how many dollars I will make in order to be able to pay you back. Okay? Not anymore. If you are a small business, a financial institution expect you to have at least 2 years of financials in order for them to be able to determine whether you will have the cash flow to be able to fund that loan. And that is a challenge for small businesses here in Las Vegas now. Because if you were in business before 2008 and you survived, your last 2 years of financials do not look good. And if you are a startup business, most financial institutions will not even take a look at you because you have no history in the ability to be able to pay back the cash flow. So financial institutions are cash flow lenders, so that's the first thing they're going to look for is a cash. And then, of course, the second thing they're going to look for is a collateral. Now, many small business loans were written off from 2008 all the way up to 2010 because when the business was gone, the businesses did not have the ability to pay the bank back. So collateral now is very important, along with your cash flow.
Okay. If there was a formula or percentage that you would look at, if I said my business generates $5,000 to $6,000 a month, which is reasonable for a small business, especially a startup or one that's in business for a couple of years, and I have a 401k or in savings or in my operations budget, I have $20,000 or $30,000. Would I be able to get a loan from your institution then?
Well, the way I'm going to answer that question is that you left half of the puzzle off, okay?
Half?
Half. Because you told me what your income was, but you did not tell me what your expenses were, okay? And the way you come up with cash flow is that you take your income after your expenses, and then the cash that is left is what we as a financial institution looks at and tells you whether you have the ability to be able to pay back a loan.
So it's not just what you have in the bank, what your income is, but you also have that side of expenses, which is very important because a lot of times your personal expenses may actually chew up that cash flow that you have, and you have no ability to pay back the loan for your business. Go ahead. You were going to say?
Now, just a few minutes ago, remember, I put a lot of emphasis on those 2 years of either tax returns or financial statements, okay? If you don't tell the IRS about it, I don't care how much money you have in the bank. It didn't happen. And a lot of small businesses struggle with that because they file their taxes with the IRS. They don't report all their income because they don't want to pay the IRS. But then they walk into the bank very proudly with 2 years of tax returns, and it says they didn't make any money, but they want the loan. And the banker is going to say, well, where's the cash? And they'll go say, it's in the bank. And?
So the key that I hear from you in this is document, document, document. That it's not only important to have the money, it's the ability to document the money when you go out seeking funds.
Yes.
So if there was one thing that you were going to say to a startup business in order to be successful, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to get a bookkeeper that is going to keep their finances in order. Because as a small business starts up, it's a challenge enough to be able to manage employees and the product that is creating your business. But let someone else manage your finances so that they will always be in order. Unless you're CPA or bookkeeper, of course.
Unless, right? Even with that, it's very difficult for an entrepreneur or a business owner to keep all the balls up in the air. And just in general, when I talk to people as well, I say to them, you have to get other people involved in your business. You are not going to be successful by yourself. There is nobody in business today that's been successful by themselves. Well, Jerry, I want to thank you for the time that we've spent together. This is Dave Wright from the Business Lounge, where we talk to real people about real business and real success. Stay tuned for part 2 just in a few minutes.